Welcome to HSDF The Podcast, a collection of policy discussions on government technology and Homeland Security brought to you by the Homeland Security and Defense Forum. In this episode, Harry Coker, National Cyber Director in the Office of the National Cyber Director, the White House, provides an in-depth look at the National Cyber Strategy, a game-changing initiative that shifts the onus of cybersecurity from everyday users to tech giants and government entities better equipped to handle these challenges. Featuring Harry Coker, National Cyber Director in the Office of the National Cyber Director, the White House. Former Congressman Jim Levine. This discussion took place at the HSDF Cybersecurity Symposium on July 10, 2024.
You know, the one thing that I saw missing from the playing field, if you were, is this position to be one national coordinator, if you will, and a principal advisor to the president on cybersecurity. My friend, Senator Angus King, referred to it in a more creative way. He said, one throat to choke. And so we have the position created. And since ONCD's establishment in 2021, can you tell me, how has the office matured and grown into the coordination mechanism role for federal cybersecurity efforts? And relatedly, as you take stock in all the great work being done across government agencies to support cybersecurity, where do you see the most potential and promise? And in what areas do you think still need more work?
Great. I'll start from the beginning. I guess you already did that 10 years ago. But then in 2021, the office stood up, and it was stood up by just an outstanding American patriot, Chris Inglis.
Absolutely.
And when Chris stood up the office, it was literally an army of one person. And now the Navy's there, and we have a fleet of roughly 75. But it was built on your shoulders and Chris Inglis' shoulders, and my immediate predecessors, Kimber Walden and Brennan Dillon, all made outstanding contributions to standing up the office. And just imagine having a startup in the White House. It's a tough turf to be in, but boy, we had the right people leading the charge between Chris and Kimba and Dylan and the team that we have right now. Mentioned that the job is to be the president's principal advisor on cybersecurity strategy and policy. The other part that I really enjoy about the job, and it's probably one of the more challenging aspects, is to bring coherence to the federal digital ecosystem. There are plenty of good partners in the federal government that are working on cybersecurity, but through your foresight and the commission's foresight, you recognize the need for an entity to bring us together and focus on the common mission objectives. So that's what that keeps us moving, just bringing our very capable partners together and coordinating our efforts as we take on an intractable challenge. The other great part of this job, and I was pleased. As you mentioned, I grew up in the Navy and in the intelligence community, and we had not always considered partnerships with the private sector as being pivotal. I've been in organizations where we just treated the private sector in an estranged manner. But it has been made clear to me and to others on the team that the federal government will not succeed in cybersecurity without a strong partnership with our private sector partners. And just an easy and obvious example of that is when we take a look at critical infrastructure, the vast majority of which is owned and or operated by the private sector, and it's called critical infrastructure for precisely that meaning. If we did not have that in place, the way of life that Americans have grown accustomed to, that we love, that we need, it would not be what we need it to be were it not for the private sector partnership. It's essential. So that's a big area of focus for us as well.
Well said. And when we build on that and ask you about the National Cyber Strategy, if I could, yes. Obviously a very important document. And what are some of the key takeaways from ONCD's perspective? And part of the strategy that I particularly like the most is emphasizing shifting the burden of cybersecurity from those that are least capable to those that are most capable. And what progress has been made in this area, and also you talk about the part that talks about liability and shifting that burden as well. The software developers, putting a little more pressure on them to make sure that they're putting out secure code. Right now, there's too much. I think a rush to market, to be first to market rather than secure to market, and the National Cyber Strategy does touch on that.
Yes, there's a lot of exceptional things about that National Cybersecurity Strategy. One of the ones is it's not our office's strategy. It's signed out by the president, but there were hundreds and hundreds of sessions with partners in the public sector and private sector. We all have skin in the game. All of our mission partners had the opportunity, and the vast majority took advantage of the opportunity to contribute to the National Cybersecurity Strategy, from providing us with concepts to consider and providing us feedback when something wasn't quite right. So that's number one. It really is owned by all of us. Secondly, there's an implementation plan that goes along with the National Cybersecurity Strategy. Strategies can be good, but they're only good and get to great when, number one, they're owned by more than the office that pins it, and we did it in this case. Number two, resources also have to be aligned with the strategy. Again, in your great wisdom, sir, and your colleagues on the Hill, we have the opportunity, and we take advantage of that opportunity to work with the Office of Management and Budget to provide guidance on cybersecurity priorities for the United States. So that's secondly, the resources are being focused in alignment with that strategy. The third aspect that I'll mention are the two big shifts that are called for in the National Cybersecurity Strategy. The first one is to shift the responsibility for defending cyberspace from those that are least capable to those that are most capable. And I use the word responsibility, shift that responsibility. Too often entities, individuals and formal collectives consider cybersecurity to be purely an inconvenience. That's just not the case. Cybersecurity is an imperative as individuals and as business organizations and government organizations. It is an imperative. It should not be lost on any one, again, individual or larger entity, that the primary mission that we may have, whatever it is, it does not happen without cybersecurity. It impacts all of us. So it's an imperative. And so the other thing I need to clarify on that shifting that responsibility from those that are least capable, end users, schools, houses of worship, it does not absolve those least capable users, that end users, from some responsibility. We shift the majority of that responsibility to those that are most capable, big tech, federal government. I was at a session last night with investors. They have some of that responsibility as well. But it does not absolve any entity of some level of responsibility. But that big shift is key. The second one is how to incentivize long-term investment in resilience and cybersecurity. You mentioned first to market, and I absolutely understand the importance from a business perspective of being first to market. But it's more than arithmetic, it's calculus. Need to be secure to market as well. And our partners, our mission partners at CISA have led the way in advocating for and providing opportunities to develop products and capabilities that are secure before they get to the market. So we need to continue with both shifts, the responsibility to those that are most capable and incentivizing long-term investment in resilience. I'll also add that part of that investment is in people as well. We've got to have the right people doing the right type of work to secure our nation's cyberspace. And I'll just go back to the front of the question. And one of the other great aspects of that national cybersecurity strategy, typically or traditionally, we've thought of our national security in terms of kinetic warfare and military power. The National Cybersecurity Strategy recognizes that the digital foundation is key to America's economic prosperity as well. So that traditional definition of national security is rightfully broadened to include the economic prosperity that allows us, again, to live in freedom.
I couldn't agree more. I've often said that cybersecurity is the national security and economic security challenge of our time, for sure. Maybe to obviously any great plan has to have an implementation strategy, which you all do. I know that recently issued the implementation plan version 2 that builds off of the version from 2023. Where have we seen the most progress, and what new initiatives were announced that you feel particularly strong about?
The great thing, again, about this implementation plan, and it flows from what's necessary to make a strategy effective, resourcing and alignment, but then having a plan, an implementation plan. I'm a former program manager, and so for me it was all about cost, schedule, and performance, accountability. So the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan is all about transparency. It's a publicly released document, the first of its kind at that scale, and it's about accountability. And what is great is that our mission partners, the departments and agencies that comprise the federal government, signed up. They weren't voluntold. They signed up to lead initiatives in the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan. Not only did they raise their hand and say, we have this, they also said, here's what we will deliver. They described that set of deliverables, and they also put in a timeline to allow themselves to be held accountable. So that was in the National Cybersecurity Implementation Plan version 1. And remarkably enough, NCS Implementation Plan version 2, there were more departments and agencies that volunteered to lead some of those efforts. It's just another sign of the realization that, again, our economic prosperity, our national security are indelibly linked with cybersecurity, and folks are standing up to do that.
Let's see if we could shift over to ONCD versus CISA. In cyber incident reporting right now, because it's very much in focus with discussions around the responsibilities of, as you talked about, critical infrastructure owners and operators. Can you just talk about what the role of ONCD versus CISA as they interact with private sector and more specifically critical infrastructure owners? And do you see opportunities to improve reciprocity among different entities on the reporting piece?
I'll answer the easy one first. Yes, there's opportunities to improve. But on the question of CIRCIA, cyber incident reporting for critical infrastructure, CIRCIA, that's vitally important. And Congress gave DHS and CISA the responsibility to make that regime more effective and more efficient. We have a lot of reporting requirements. ONCD is a part of the Critical Infrastructure Reporting Council, that the CIRC that CISA leads, and it was September 2023 that the CIRC listed 40 different cybersecurity incident reporting requirements, 40, with 10 more coming down the pipe. That's too many. And the CIRCIA tasked DHS and CISA to help address that challenge. And I think it was this past spring, that CISA had the rulemaking proposal that was published, and they received the responses from all those that cared to provide responses on 3 July. They were due. So CISA's working through that now, taking feedback, hopefully from you all. They certainly had feedback from ONCD on how to work that rulemaking to harmonize cybersecurity incident reporting requirements. So our role with CISA on this front is to help provide input and the assessment of the validation and of input from you all on how to streamline reporting requirements. Too many of our mission partners in the private sector have multiple and duplicative and ambiguous reporting requirements on not just for cyber incident, but other regulatory requirements. But on cyber incident reporting, that CIRC that we sit on with, that led by CISA, is tasked with bringing that together. You talk about regulatory harmonization more broadly. We're thrilled that, I believe it was yesterday, that Chairman Peters and Senator Langford introduced a bill that that hopefully will lead to ONCD bringing forward a committee and an action on regulatory harmonization. And that's with recognition that regulation in this aspect is for the purpose of being more secure in cyberspace, not regulation for regulation's sake. We also expect the right level of regulation will decrease the cost of doing business, again, by doing away with the duplicitous reporting requirements.
Great. And you talk about data. That's a great teaser for a panel that's going to be coming up later this afternoon, talking about data and cybersecurity. So you talked about earlier on the workforce, and obviously I've often said we have all the great policies and the right positions created, but without the people to do the job, we're not going to get very far. So workforce development continues to be a top priority to know for federal agencies. Can you talk about the recently released ONCD's National Cyber Workforce Strategy, and where do you see agencies having? We often see agencies having to compete for talent, and what's the role of ONCD in helping agencies to attract the best and the brightest and retain that talent, and how do you see we can simplify the hiring processes to ensure the wealth of talent that we need is evenly distributed across the federal government?
Right. I love to talk about workforce because we win or we lose with our folks. And right now, America has nearly 500,000 open cyber positions. We're not losing, but we need to do more on that front. And we are working across not just the federal space, but the entire cyberspace to include federal, state, local, tribal, territorial, private sector, and our allies, because this is a global challenge. How do we get the right people working on the right side of cyberspace? So a couple of things that we're doing in our role, again, back to federal coherence. We have just a great partnership with the Office of Personnel Management, OPM. And OPM does the heavy lift on this easy stuff that I'm getting ready to articulate. The 4-year degree requirement for federal contractors, it was not a solid requirement. Although we love the 4-year classical education, it's the experiential part that's most important. So we are working with the Office of Personnel and Management to shift to a skills-based approach to hiring. Skills-based. That means what does an individual know? What have they done? What can they do? What is their aptitude to learn? Not merely do they have this 4-year degree. I think we all probably know some folks that are very, very capable that don't have a 4-year degree and could be contributing.
They're usually about 12 years old, by the way, right?
Yeah.
You have a problem with tech, you ask a 12-year-old to fix it. But your point is right.
Indeed,
well taken.
And another point along those lines is when we have this 4-year degree, there are many military members, military veterans that have the skill set that we need, that have the commitment, the patriotism that we need in cyberspace, but they may not have a 4-year degree. We can go right up the road, Fort Meade, Maryland, U.S. Cyber Command, National Security Agency, where there are many military members, many of whom do not have 4-year degrees, but almost all of whom I would have sit shoulder to shoulder with me and defend America's cyberspace. So that shift to skills-based hiring is something that we're partnered with OPM on with our federal contractors, and it's OMB as well. The other part is not just contractors. Occupation Series 2210, I believe, is the largest IT management occupation in the federal government, 2210. OPM has agreed to take on the very challenging, heavy lift of shifting that entire series to skills-based hiring. Again, I get to say the easy stuff. They have the tough challenge that we all agree is worth it. And OPM, my friend and mission partner, Acting Director Rob Schreiber, has agreed that by June 2025, that series 2210 will shift to skills-based hiring. And the other thing I have to point out when it comes to the cyber workforce, for years and years, I had a jaundiced perspective on public sector versus private sector when it came to talent, and I was wrong. When it comes to talent, when it comes to cybersecurity, again, we can go back to these 16 critical infrastructure sectors, the majority of which are owned and operated by the private sector. We're on the same team. We are not competing for that talent. We need to complement each other. There's nothing wrong with an individual leaving government service and going to work in the private sector. Cybersecurity is national security. It's economic prosperity. So as I have matured, I recognize that need to complement each other and not compete for talent. And it comes down to developing an environment that an individual believes they can thrive in. And we need to help the private sector do that, and we need to help the public sector do that.
Couldn't agree more. I've often said that the federal government shouldn't be just fighting for a bigger slice of the pie, and we've got to grow the whole pie itself. Indeed. I think everybody wins that way. One of the things that I fought hard for in creating the Office of the National Cyber Director is to make sure, very similar to the drug czar, that you could look across departments and agencies and looking at their budgets. I think it's really important that somebody, because departments and agencies are basically responsible for their own cybersecurity, and yet nobody really had eyes on specifically their budgets to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing in cyber. The different departments and agencies have different missions, right? And cyber is not necessarily going to be the priority, but it has to be. Yes. So can you talk about that kind of pass-through authority? I know you can't, direct that they do more, but you can take out your red pen and you can at least flag where they're doing well and where they're not, and then OMB evidently obviously is the final arbiter and of what needs to be done in terms of more spending and more focus. But can you comment on that?
Absolutely. The National Cybersecurity Strategy really is built on partnerships, and we have a strong partnership with the Office of Management and Budget. The point you mentioned about budget authority and budget oversight, that's where we are strongly partnered with OMB, and we've been able to do that because the predecessors in my job, the staff that's in our office, demonstrated the value added that ONCD could bring to the budget process. So when it comes to budget authority, budget oversight, aligning the budget with the strategy, ONCD is partnered with OMB. They're absolutely in the lead and will stay in the lead on budget, and that's great, but they welcome us as partners. It was just yesterday, could have been today, sorry, that I co-signed the FY26 Cybersecurity Priorities Memo with OMB Director Young. And it, again, aligns the resources for FY26 in accordance with the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And that's the way to do it. Let the departments and agencies know where the funding ought to go to address the National Cybersecurity Strategy. We also provide throughout the year OMB with input and feedback on cybersecurity budgets. And the other good thing, I know, early on in my program management tenure, I used to react in a less than positive way to oversight, but now I've seen that many of our departments and agencies welcome a different perspective as long as there's value added. We have great partnerships with departments and agencies, CIOs and CISOs. And a lot of that has to do with the recognition, again, that those top line missions that are there in the departments and agencies, they do not get done without the CIOs and the CISOs taking care of cybersecurity. We're their advocates on that, and happy to do so, and we are welcomed by OMB on that front.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a welcome voice at the table, having an advocate for them.
Yes.
They may not be heard by their agency leads. We just got the 5-minute warning mark just a minute or so ago. So let me shift to ransomware. Obviously, an issue that continues to wreak havoc for many critical industries, and we've seen a lot of examples recently, and obviously the healthcare sector.
Yes.
Can you basically talk about our strategy to defeat ransomware attacks? And do you think that law enforcement and our intelligence community has the resources and authorities needed to disrupt criminal groups responsible for carrying out these attacks?
Yes. We've got a lot of work to do on ransomware because those criminals, our adversaries, are not slowing down. And they recognize the basics. Go to the weakest link. And that's where that's where they choose to attack, the weakest link. What we are pleased with is that the cybersecurity strategy and the policies, for example, Executive Order 14028, that advocates multi-factor authentication and encryption of data at rest and in transit, and a number of other measures. If entities follow the strategies and the policies that are in place, cybercrime writ large, ransomware in particular, they'll go down. But we have to continue to figure out how do we get entities to do the right things, how to adhere to those policies. Human nature, organizational behavior, sometimes the reality is they're not going to get it all done. So we are continuing to work with the intelligence community, the law enforcement community, and one of the big challenges that our partners at State Department, CDP, state recently introduced their international strategy. And one of the things that it addresses, and it's in alignment with our strategy, is we need to go after safe havens for these cyber criminals as well. There are safe havens around the globe that allow this bad behavior, and we need to continue to work with our international partners to eliminate places for these criminals to go. It's going to be a continuous effort to prevent and mitigate ransomware. Again, back to incentivizing behavior and secure the market. Software liability is an area we need to take a look at. Cyber insurance is another area that we need to take a look at. And again, not for regulation's sake, but how to up our overall cybersecurity posture.
Thank you for tuning in to HSDF the Podcast. You can follow this podcast on any major podcast platform. Visit hsdf.org to learn more about the Homeland Security and Defense Forum.